Have you ever wondered about the untold stories of human history, the ones that echo with the whispers of forgotten tragedies? Today, we delve into one such story, the Holodomor. This is not just a tale from the pages of history, but a chilling reminder of the depths humanity can sink to. A man-made disaster shrouded in secrecy and denial that claimed millions of lives. Are you ready to turn the pages of history and uncover the hidden truth of this man-made disaster? The year was 1932, a time when the Soviet Union was under the iron grip of Joseph Stalin, a portrait of a nation painted in stark contrasts. On one hand, the promises of a socialist utopia; on the other, the harsh reality of autocratic rule. This was an era of sweeping social and political changes. Stalin, the man of steel, was implementing drastic policies aimed at rapid industrialization. The first 5-year plan had just concluded, and the country was gearing up for the second. Agriculture was forcibly collectivized, and private farms were replaced with state-owned collectives. It was a time of great upheaval, but it was in Ukraine, the breadbasket of the Soviet Union, where the consequences of these policies would be felt the most acutely. The rich, fertile lands were stripped bare of their produce, taken away to feed the cities and to be exported abroad. The farmers, the kulaks as they were pejoratively called, were left with next to nothing. Stalin's policies left little room for resistance. Those who opposed or even questioned the collectivization were branded as enemies of the state. They were arrested, exiled, or worse. Fear and repression became the order of the day. As the year wore on, the situation in Ukraine began to worsen. The autumn harvest was a failure. The granaries were empty. The once bustling markets were now eerily quiet. The first signs of a looming famine started to appear, but the cries for help fell on deaf ears. The state-controlled media painted a rosy picture of bountiful harvests and happy peasants. Meanwhile, the reality on the ground was starkly different. People were beginning to starve. By the end of 1932, the seeds of a disastrous famine were sown, setting the stage for a devastating tragedy. As 1933 dawned, Ukraine was plunged into a year of unimaginable suffering. The year 1933 marked the peak of the Holodomor, a man-made famine that consumed the Ukrainian landscape. This period bore witness to the culmination of policies that were as harsh as they were devastating. The governing powers, in an attempt to force collective farming, imposed impossible grain quotas on the Ukrainian people. These quotas were not merely unrealistic, they were punitive, leaving little to nothing for the people to nourish themselves. As the granaries were emptied, the fields lay barren, and the larders became hollow shells. A widespread hunger began to creep across the land. It was not the kind of hunger one feels after a long day of work. It was a gnawing, insidious hunger that consumed the body and the soul. It was a hunger that left mothers too weak to nurse their infants, children too famished to play, and elders too drained to tell their tales. It was a hunger that knew no mercy. The human cost of this hunger was staggering. It was not uncommon to see once vibrant communities transformed into ghost towns, their inhabitants reduced to mere shadows of their former selves. People were forced to make unimaginable choices, some even resorting to cannibalism in their desperation. In cities, towns, and villages, the tolling of the death bells became an all-too-familiar sound, a grim reminder of the lives lost to this man-made catastrophe. The shadow of death loomed large over Ukraine, claiming millions of lives. Each life represented a story cut short, a song left unsung, a dream left unrealized. The land, once known for its golden wheat fields, was now a canvas of despair, painted with the silent screams of its people. The heart of Ukraine was bleeding, its pulse weakening with every passing moment. In the face of such overwhelming suffering, one may wonder, where was the world? Why was there no outcry, no intervention? The answer, my friends, is a tale as old as time. A tale of cover-ups and denials, of political interests and diplomatic silences. The shadow of death loomed large over Ukraine, claiming millions of lives. While Ukraine starved, the Soviet Union remained silent, hiding the truth from the world. As a nation reeled under the weight of a man-made famine, the powers that be were more invested in maintaining their global image than saving their own people. The Soviet Union went to great lengths to cover up the Holodomor, the man-made famine that devastated Ukraine in the early 1930s. The government's machinations were two-pronged. Domestically, they suppressed information, ensuring that the truth remained confined within the borders of Ukraine. Internationally, they launched a campaign of disinformation, painting a rosy picture of prosperity and abundance. Within the Soviet Union, any discussion of the famine was strictly forbidden. Books were censored, journalists were silenced, and anyone daring to speak out was swiftly and harshly dealt with. The Soviet government created an iron curtain, not just between them and the Western world, but also between their own citizens. The truth of the Holodomor was buried deep under layers of fear and oppression. Simultaneously, on the global stage, the Soviet Union was weaving a narrative of success and prosperity. They invited foreign journalists to staged events and carefully curated tours of the countryside, ensuring that they only saw what the government wanted them to see. These journalists, none the wiser, reported back to their countries about the success of the Soviet Union's agricultural policies, unwittingly becoming mouthpieces for the Soviet propaganda. Moreover, the Soviet Union used diplomatic channels to deny the existence of the famine. They dismissed any reports of starvation as anti-Soviet propaganda. The world, eager for peace and stability, chose to believe these denials, turning a blind eye to the distress signals coming from Ukraine. The cover-up was so effective that it wasn't until years later, with the fall of the Soviet Union, that the full extent of the Holodomor became known. The world was finally made aware of the millions of lives lost to starvation, the children who had been robbed of their futures, and the nation that had been brought to its knees. The world remained oblivious to the grim reality of the Holodomor as the Soviet Union continued to weave a web of lies. The truth was suppressed, but it could not be erased. The memory of the Holodomor lives on, a stark reminder of humanity's capacity for cruelty and denial. The decade following the Holodomor was marked by silence and fear, but the truth could not be buried forever. As the years passed, the veil of secrecy slowly began to lift. Word of the horrific events began to seep out, first as whispers, then as undeniable evidence. In the immediate aftermath of the Holodomor, the survivors were left to pick up the pieces of their shattered lives. They rebuilt their homes, their communities, and their lives, all the while carrying the heavy burden of their losses. But the story of the Holodomor was not to be shared. Fear of reprisals from the Soviet regime kept many survivors silent, their stories untold. However, the truth has a way of making itself known. Despite the Soviet regime's attempts to cover up the Holodomor, news of the event began to trickle out. Reports from foreign journalists, accounts from defectors, and the tireless work of researchers and historians slowly brought the reality of the Holodomor to light. As more and more evidence came to light, the world began to take notice. In the late 20th century, the Holodomor was finally recognized by many nations as a genocide, a deliberate and systematic extermination of a people. This recognition was a significant step towards justice for the victims of the Holodomor, even if it came decades after the event. Yet recognition was not universal. Some countries and individuals continue to deny the Holodomor, dismissing it as a myth or a result of natural disaster. These denials only serve to underscore the importance of remembering and acknowledging the Holodomor for what it was, an act of unimaginable cruelty and inhumanity. The recognition of the Holodomor is not just about setting the historical record straight. It's about honoring the victims and ensuring that their suffering is not forgotten. It's about learning from the past to prevent such atrocities in the future. Despite the attempts to erase it, the memory of the Holodomor lives on, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. The scars of the Holodomor may fade with time, but its memory will forever be a stark reminder of the depths of human cruelty and the heights of human resilience. The Holodomor, a man-made famine, a cover-up, a genocide. These are the stark realities that history has handed down to us. This tragic chapter of the 20th century, largely obscured from public view, stands as a stark testament to the darkest corners of human nature. A famine engineered by man, the Holodomor was an insidious ploy to quell Ukrainian nationalism, a brutal assault on a people and their culture. Millions of lives were extinguished, their suffering swept under the rug of political convenience. Yet, this tragedy has been met with denial, its very existence questioned, its victims left without justice. The cover-up that followed the Holodomor is a chilling reminder of how easily truth can be distorted, manipulated, and buried. It's a testament to the lengths that those in power will go to preserve their image, even at the expense of humanity. Despite the denial and cover-up, the world has slowly come to recognize the Holodomor for what it was, a genocide. Countries around the globe have acknowledged this horrific event, honoring the victims and the survivors and pledging to learn from their suffering. Remembering the Holodomor is not just about paying tribute to the past, it's about learning from history, about understanding the cost of silence and ignorance, about valuing truth over convenience. As we look back at the Holodomor, we are reminded of the price of silence, the cost of ignorance, and the value of truth. May history's echo serve as our guide.